Today on CityCast Boise, public lands shape everyday life in Idaho, from weekend hikes to wildfire safety. But President Trump's new proposals to slash the budgets of the agencies that care for them could have devastating consequences. What does this mean for the future of our favorite outdoor spaces? It's Wednesday, August 27th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Joining me today is Heath Drusen, host of the new podcast, Howl. Thanks so much for being here today, Heath.
Thanks for having me again.
Jumping right into this, what exactly is being cut or has been cut from public lands budgets or has been proposed as a cut, and who's proposing these cuts?
So many cuts. It's hard to keep them straight. It gets a little confusing. So what's already happened is Doge, Elon Musk's sort of pet government project to slash budgets for a lot of different things. They went in and basically started firing people in public lands agencies. So we're talking about national forests, national parks, BLM, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. So that already happened. And basically the people were fired, they were rehired, they were fired again. And then a bunch of people left, understandably, because they're like, this does not seem like the secure job that I signed up for. Bottom line, roughly a quarter of national forest staffers, basically a quarter of the workforce is gone right now. Some of that's through attrition, right? Some of that's through jobs that weren't filled, but a lot of people left. And so that already happened. That's a problem. Big staffing crisis. That's even before the cuts we're about to talk about. So what we're about to talk about is basically the president has a proposed budget. And Trump proposed essentially an across-the-board cut of about a third of the budget of all the major public lands agencies. National parks, the obvious one, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, the agency that runs that. But then national forests, which Idahoans probably interact with a lot more, that is a separate agency. BLM, we know well, often in the more sort of desert areas. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, as it sounds, they deal with wildlife issues. All of those basically kind of between 33 and 37% cuts proposed by Trump. That's huge. That's like a lot of people who have worked in those agencies have described it as a path to dismantling public lands agencies. So existential in their view.
And so with these cuts, it sounds like it's pretty even across the board. Is there any agency in particular that is feeling more of the brunt of this, or is it just kind of across the board, they're all being slashed or right around 33%?
It's pretty across the board. The national parks have gotten more attention for obvious reasons. They're just more prominent, but it's kind of interesting to see how even the cuts are, because it does seem to be a really sort of systematic play to reduce the effectiveness of these public lands agencies. Now, what the folks proposing them will tell you, including Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, he's saying, "Oh well, we're cutting people who don't work in the parks, so IT staff, support staff, all of this," and that might be true, but as anyone who's worked at a large agency can tell you, they rely on those people to do a lot. I mean, if you pretend that IT has nothing to do with natural spaces in 2025, that's just not true, right? I mean, they obviously rely on a lot of technology to keep things running.
So does this seem to you like these are cuts being made by people who don't really understand all of the different roles that go into maintaining these services, not just like rangers or the people who, clean up the areas or make sure that the trails are safe? Are these cuts like that, or is it in your perspective, more like how it's been described as a systematic dismantling through maybe these ancillary positions?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, look, we have a president who is a New York real estate billionaire who hasn't touched a lot of grass in his life other than a fairway. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say that Donald Trump is not super familiar with national parks and national forests. So I do think there's a lot of ignorance there. However, there's also some sort of cleverness if you're trying to sell cuts to national treasures like Yellowstone, because it's very loaded towards keeping quote unquote visitor services funded, at least for a while. And what that means is basically they're trying to keep these cuts out of view, at least as long as they can, where people come to the gate and, they don't notice anything at the gate, the line moves, they go to the visitor center, they go to the gift shop, and everything seems normal. Those things would theoretically keep being funded. But what you're really starting to chip away at is maintenance, a lot of historic buildings out there, and research. And nobody sees the research, not directly, right? There's so many people out in the backcountry studying extremely important environmental issues. So there certainly seems to be some carelessness with the land, but also there's a plan for sure.
It kind of sounds like on a movie set or a theater set where you have the false front to like a building up. So it looks like everything's great. It looks solid. But if you go behind, there's not much there, or it's been really stripped back. So with that kind of happening, what favorite parks or local public lands or recreational areas are going to start to feel the brunt of these cuts first?
I've been doing a lot of reporting on this and talking to people who have worked in national parks for a long time and national forests, and including pretty high positions. And what they're really concerned about is research. There's a ton of research that's going on, and it's really important to understanding the natural world, to understanding climate change and how it's affecting the ecology of all these places, to saving endangered species. A lot of people don't realize this because it happens behind the scenes, but there are literally programs that have been going on for decades. There's research that's been going on for 60 years. And what's really important about that is there's a body of work over the years where you can see trends. You can see how different climactic events or diseases or anything affects wildlife or affects a habitat. And if you cut that and you stop it even for a few months, when you have this unbroken chain of research going on for 60 years, you can't get that back. It's devastating. And there's also projects that just, if these cuts are passed, just aren't going to happen in the first place. And when you go to Yellowstone and you see this beautiful intact ecosystem, which is one of the largest intact ecosystems in the world, it doesn't happen just on its own. There's lots of people out in the backcountry studying how to keep it that way and how to prevent it from being spoiled. And that's happening all over national parks and national forests, from here to the East Coast up to Alaska.
Can you give us some examples of what we could lose or what could change for us if these long-term studies collapse or lose funding, or they have to stop research for a few years? What kind of an impact could that have for people visiting parks or Idahoans?
Well, I mean, one thing that could happen is eventually you could have animals disappear. Animals that you go to parks to see. A lot of people go to Yellowstone to see wolves. Wolves are doing well there, but there's about 100 to 125 wolves in Yellowstone, depending on the year. It's a fragile population. So that population, it's not written in stone that they're going to be there forever. Part of the way that they are managed is through research. So that could happen, right? There's all kinds of research on invasive species and keeping them out of rivers. We're used to pristine rivers in Idaho, and we take that for granted. But it's all managed. Even wilderness areas are managed to stay that way. And then, this is less research, but it's funding. You like trails? I like trails. You like not having, fallen trees all over your trail all the time? That takes money. That takes trail maintenance. And trail crews are already feeling it. I'm already hearing trail crews are just not fully staffed. And those trails don't magically get cleared, right? These are wild places. Things fall on them. They erode. There are landslides. I mean, you're going to see a lot less maintained trails if these deep cuts happen.
Heath, recently I had an interview with the general manager of Boise State Public Radio, Tom Michael. And when we were discussing the budget cuts that they're navigating, he did say that because of those cuts, they were adapting, they were getting creative. So what if, just theoretically, what if these cuts to public lands could have a similar effect? Like, what if they do expose some inefficiencies that maybe public land advocates don't want to admit? I mean, nobody wants to think like maybe we are spending a little too much here or here or here, and we could make some cuts. So is there an argument that this could potentially expose some inefficiencies that we could get creative and do better?
I think any government agency probably has some things they could do better. Definitely, right? However, I will say targeting public lands agencies as like some kind of bloated budget is a little bit weird because it's kind of been the opposite. I talked to a longtime U.S. Fish and Wildlife trapper and tracker, and he was talking. He was working on one of the most high profile projects in history in these programs, which was bringing wolves back. And he was literally building his own wolf traps because they couldn't buy him like the right kind of wolf trap. So, I mean, that's just one example, but these are guys who they're working long hours, and they're doing a lot of things very DIY because the budget already is so tight. So can you find efficiencies? Sure. The way these proposals are, though, it doesn't seem to be very surgical.
So from your perspective, if they're already running on really slim margins, they're already MacGyvering, and public lands, public parks, these recreational spots are very popular, not just in Idaho, but in the country. But, Idahoans particularly do love them. Then why has this become such a focus for the federal government and for legislators in Western states like Mike Lee? Like, who benefits if the research stops, if the trails close, or the land gets sold off? Like, why has this become such a focus?
Yeah, that's a good question. Frankly, it seems to be a political loser. In the case of Mike Lee, what you're talking about there, that's even one more proposal. That was to sell off a ton of public land. Well, who benefits there? That one's the easiest question to answer. Really rich people benefit there because they can buy beautiful land that is our land at the moment. That proposal got blowback from everyone from crunchy tree huggers to militia leaders, and I'm not exaggerating. Everybody hated that. It seemed like nobody except Mike Lee and Donald Trump liked it. So that's off the table for now, but I guarantee you something will come back. As far as the cuts to public land agencies, yeah, I mean, who benefits? It's a little bit of a head scratcher. It seems to be just sort of this more ideological thing where everything needs to be cut in government, and that is just one more thing. But it's wildly unpopular. People love public lands. Democrats love public lands, Republicans love public lands. And it is one of these issues where there's not even that much of a divide. Like, people like it because it's a thing that makes America special, especially the American West. Like, I spend a ton of time overseas, a ton of time in Europe. There's beautiful places there, but let me tell you, there's nothing like the American West. There's a reason that people come from all over the world to visit it. So I really don't know that many people who this is popular with.
So, since the Mike Lee proposals got so much blowback and were so unpopular, are we seeing the same level of outrage and upset with Donald Trump's new proposals for these cuts? Are people equally as outraged? Are we seeing a similar level of outrage from Democrats and Republicans and Idahoans in general, people who live in the West?
I think this is flying more under the radar. And part of the reason is because it is just a proposal, but it is a proposal from a president who not a lot of people are saying no to in the Republican Party. So it still has to get through Congress. And there have been some counter proposals. And Mike Simpson actually is a key chairman in the House. He basically had a counter proposal with more modest cuts, but still cuts. So he has an idea that basically would kind of split the difference between not cutting and the Trump cuts, which certainly would be less devastating for public lands agencies. And then the Senate actually has a proposal right now, a Senate committee that would basically keep the budget flat. Now, obviously, things get more expensive every year. There's more visitors every year. So a flat budget is kind of a cut, but it's much, much more palatable for these agencies. So I think you're not seeing the same level of reaction because a lot of people don't know because the process is still ongoing. But usually these committees kind of help craft a compromise. But we have seen with Donald Trump, he's not a huge fan of not getting his way, and Republicans haven't stood in his way that much. And that includes Mike Simpson, who, despite his moderate reputation, has been pretty cozy with Trump, including wanting to name a opera house after Donald Trump's wife. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I don't know, but there's still more to come.
I was going to say, it seems like even our staunchest public lands advocates, supposedly Mike Simpson, haven't exactly been standing in Trump's way. And I'm really curious to see too, or I feel like this could be a really good litmus test for this idea that it almost seems like it doesn't matter whether ideas are popular or not. As soon as Trump decides he's going to do them, Republicans fall in line and things happen. So I'm very curious to see with this issue that seems to galvanize people on both sides of the aisle across the state, whether we'll see that it doesn't really matter if things are popular or not anymore, they'll get passed as a show of deference to our president.
Yeah, that's what's weird about this political moment. It seems like extremely unpopular ideas can still get through in a way that before were moderated or even killed by public pushback. So I don't know. I don't know what'll happen. The public land sale idea, that did get killed. So I guess there is still some room for the public to weigh in and have an impact. So certainly don't think that your voice doesn't matter. It can.
And speaking of unpopular ideas, Michael Boren, the co-founder of the multi-billion-dollar tech company Clearwater Analytics, who has been an Idaho resident as of late, has been nominated by President Trump as the USDA undersecretary. So he would be in charge of the Forest Service, which is interesting. Some listeners may know this, that he's had run-ins with the Forest Service in the Stanley area. Since I have you here, I am dying to get your thoughts on this proposed appointment.
Yeah, Michael Boren, famously not a fan of the Forest Service, is almost certainly going to run it. He's gotten through committee, and it seems very unlikely that the Republican Senate will not confirm him. So, he built an airstrip in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area that was not allowed. The Forest Service said it's not allowed, but it still is there. It was a very strange thing. And then very infamously, they are building a trail through some of his land, as was agreed on when he bought the land. But apparently he's not happy. He doesn't want that trail there. And this is right in the Sawtooth. And he had a helicopter and took it up over the trail crew and buzzed them very low. And I can tell you from experience, helicopter, the wash, as it's called, from the rotors is really strong, kicks up rocks, kicks up all kinds of debris. It's extremely dangerous to do that. And so he did that seemingly to harass a trail crew. And now he's been tapped to lead the service that would include that trail crew, the Forest Service that told him his airstrip was illegal. It has a lot of public lands advocates very, very concerned. That's to say nothing of the fact that he doesn't have any experience in that kind of role.
So what do you think the impact on the Forest Service could be? Having somebody who isn't a fan of the Forest Service and doesn't seem to be a strong advocate or have any experience with public lands or running public lands, public parks as the USDA undersecretary. What is that potentially going to look like?
I think there's a lot of fear that there will be deference to private landowners, a lot of rich people, as opposed to deference to keeping the public land public. Michael Boren is a very rich person who has pushed the envelope, to say the least, on public land use and access. So, if you value public access over rich neighbors having a say in public lands, then Michael Boren certainly would raise some red flags.
Heath, if you could leave listeners with one last message about why this matters, why we need to keep an eye on this, and why this moment is so crucial for public lands, what would it be?
There's almost nowhere else in the world where we have this kind of access to public lands and this amount of public lands that are protected to various degrees. What we have in Idaho and throughout the West is extremely special, but it is not guaranteed forever. Once those lands are developed, if they're degraded, it's a lot easier to ruin them than to bring them back. And frankly, at a certain point, I got a lot of warnings from people who've worked in these jobs for a long time saying, once you ruin it, you might never get it back. So protecting it on the front end is extremely important.
Well, Heath, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, break this down, and share some of the insight you've gathered working on your podcast, Howl. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, that's a great reason to become a CityCast Boise neighbor. Head over to membership.citycast.fm to get signed up and join the neighborhood. We'll be back tomorrow morning with an insider look at the Ustick neighborhood. Catch you then.